Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Today in True Crime and Portraits podcast. I'm your host, Jane Flowers. On today's episode, Indictments Are Coming, I will be talking about organized criminals running the judicial system in Greenwood, Mississippi. I'll be speaking to you about how they have been using my mother's name with identity theft and how I have a breach of fiduciary with my trust fund with these crooks. If you're not familiar with who my mother is, then let me please introduce you to her. Her name is Brenda B. Flowers, and she was from Greenwood, Mississippi. Today's true crime story begins in 2001 when my mother, Brenda B. Flowers, used another person's Social Security number as her own to open up a joint bank account with my sister, Claire Flowers, at Trustmark Bank in Greenwood, Mississippi. After my mother opened up the bank account with this other person's Social Security number, she then started embezzling my World War II Series E bonds that were left to me and my trust fund by my grandfather, Thomas Chester Boring Sr., and his wife, Martha Barber Boring. My mother did not work alone embezzling from my trust. Attorney Floyd Melton Jr. was over my trust from December the 11th, 1980, till March of 2007, and he helped her embezzle from my trust before she passed away in 2006 while she was under his care. After she passed away from a heart attack, Floyd, with the help of his family members, went ahead and embezzled the rest of my World War II Series E bonds. In the end, he left me no record in my final accounting that I ever owned in my trust World War II Series E bonds. My mother had guardian ad litem over my trust fund up until her death in 2006. My trust was held at Melton Law Firm with Trustmark Bank in Greenwood, Mississippi. Just recently, I found out that my mother was embezzling from my trust when I did a search with the Department of Treasury in December of 2019 under my mother's name and this other person's Social Security number that she was using. The search came back and identified World War II Series E bonds that she had redeemed over 10 years ago under her name and this other person's Social Security number. Shortly after my mother opened up a checking account with this other person's Social Security number, she then started embezzling from my trust because she was in debt with the IRS $250,000 and she didn't have the money to pay off her debt. As well, she was 105 pounds from abusing prescription morphine prescribed to her because of a surgery she had on her spine that left her in pain 24/7, so she said. My mother, Brenda Flowers, is dead because of her involvement with organized criminals that were essentially using her to get to my assets. My mother paid with her life because of her involvement with these crooks that are mostly white-collar attorneys and a judge running the judicial system in Greenwood, Mississippi. Meaning they can do whatever they want with anything having to do with real estate, deeds, their clients' money, and even rulings and court hearings dealing with them because they run the judicial system in Mississippi. As well, they are politically connected with President Trump. They are his friends and have been for quite some time. They're also very good friends with the governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves. And attorney Floyd Melton Jr. has been very good friends with former Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant since the 1990s. The Trotter and Melton crime families were introduced to President Donald Trump through Suresh Chawla and Janesh Chawla. The Chawlas are former business partners with Eric and Don Trump and are practically like family with Floyd Melton III and his kids. It's not just one crime family working together in this organized criminal enterprise running the judicial system. There are several crime families working together in a very small town running a multi-million-dollar organized criminal enterprise. Most of these people went to the same high school, Pillow Academy, like I did. I went to high school at Pillow Academy with many of the organized criminals that are involved with my breach of fiduciary with my trust. I've been talking quite a bit about these organized criminals, and now I think it's about time I reveal to you who they are. I'm going to go down the list for you, which is quite long, and name every person that is involved with my breach of fiduciary with my trust fund and the identity theft associated with my mother's name. Here we go, people. There is attorney Floyd Melton Jr., attorney Floyd Melton III, Lisa Trotter Melton, attorney Wally Stuckey, computer programmer Derry Johnson, Dr. John McLean Trotter, attorney Moss Melton, Sandra K. Hayes, Richard Hayes, Judge Barnwell, Claire Flowers, and Knox Flowers. There are more people involved, but as of now, these are the only ones that I am able to say are definitely involved. All of these people will eventually be indicted for their involvement with my breach of fiduciary with my trust. After my mother's passing in 2006, attorney Floyd Melton Jr. filled a fake will out for my mother. In the fake will, which was filed 2 weeks after her death, it put my little brother, Knox Flowers, as the executor of her estate. My little brother was put executor of her estate so he and Floyd Melton III could have complete control over her assets and my stepfather's assets. They would later leave her estate open 10 years after her death. My sister and I went to court trying to have her estate closed and get an accounting of her estate, but unfortunately we were not able to get an accounting, but we were able to get her estate closed. We fought all the way up to the Mississippi Supreme Court for an accounting of her estate and lost. We did get a ruling with the Court of Appeals in Mississippi for an accounting, but attorney Floyd Melton III fought all the way up to the Mississippi Supreme Court to stop my sister and I from getting an accounting of our mother's estate. To make a long story short, I and my sister did not receive an accounting of our mother's estate per the Mississippi Supreme Court ruling on our case. As time went by, I would later discover why Floyd Melton III fought so hard not to give an accounting of my mother's estate. It's because he and his father were involved in identity theft with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust fund. One of the people helping my mother embezzle from my trust is a woman from Syracuse, New York. In 2001, the woman was living in Syracuse, New York with her family. Her name is Sandra K. Hayes. Her husband's name is Richard Hayes. Both of these people were helping my mother and attorney Floyd Melton Jr. embezzle from my trust. There are several other people in Syracuse, New York that are involved with the identity theft with my mother's name. I was able to find out emails, addresses, and phone numbers, people's names that are associated with the identity theft with my mother's name in Syracuse, New York. I contacted the Syracuse, New York Police Department and sent them my findings about the identity theft related to my mother's name. To make a long story short, they refused to help me. I've gone to great lengths to try to have criminal detectives at the Syracuse Police Department in Syracuse, New York, investigate my case, but I've had no success in having someone help me investigate my identity theft claim as of yet. I'm assuming that the police in Syracuse, New York are being paid off by these organized criminals in Mississippi and in New York. I would not know if this is true and factual, but this is what I suspect. This is how they conduct business. They pay people off to keep quiet. They pay people off to stop investigating my case. I'm not going to stop trying to get indictments on these people, and currently I can't afford to retain an attorney to represent me in my case. I have reached out to multiple attorneys in multiple states, asking them if they would help me with my case and take it on contingency. But I have not found an attorney yet that will take my case on contingency. I'm due to recover over $4 million in World War II Series E bonds that were embezzled from my trust. My mother told me on 2 different occasions while in Melton's law firm that I had a little under $5 million in World War II Series E bonds that my grandfather and my grandmother left me in my trust, and I am the sole beneficiary. Throughout my investigation, I conducted 3 searches with the Department of Treasury over a 2-year period. The first search I did identified bonds that my grandfather and grandmother purchased in 1943. The second search I did was a search under my mother's name and her Social Security number. The search did not identify bonds that were redeemed under my mother's name and her social. The third search I did with the Department of Treasury was in December 2019, last year, and it did identify bonds that were redeemed under my mother's name and another person's Social Security number. Later, I did a search on the internet under my mother's name to see what and where her name would pull up. I was looking for anything out of the norm that was associated with her name. I later found out that my mother's name had been used in Syracuse, New York from 2001 to 2016 through a search on TruthFinder. After I did the search with TruthFinder, I posted my results on Facebook, and the attorneys subpoenaed TruthFinder and told them that they could not publish my mother's record anymore on their site. The only reason I'm able to start my case for a breach of fiduciary with my trust fund is because I did a search with the Department of Treasury and found my World War II Series E bonds that were cashed out under my mother's name and another person's Social Security number. After I did the last search with the Department of Treasury in December 2019 with my mother's name and another person's Social Security number, I was then curious if the bank account was still open that my mother was using with this other person's Social Security number. So I called Trustmark Bank and told them that I suspect my mother was using my tax ID number with a bank account that was associated with my trust, and could they please run my tax ID number through their database and see if my checking account was still associated with my trust in my mother's name. The bank teller at Trustmark Bank ran the tax ID number I gave her through her database. She came back and told me that she was not able to see a tax ID number, but she was able to see this was a person's Social Security number that I had on my bank statement with my mother's name. She then told me the person's last name that owned the Social Security number was Hayes. At the time when I heard this, I was confused because I was not aware at the time that my mother was involved with identity theft. I became aware of this on a later date in July of 2020. Eventually, I contacted the police in Jackson, Mississippi, and asked a detective to investigate this bank statement I had with someone else's Social Security number with my mom's name. The detective investigated my case for a few weeks, and then he sent it to Greenwood, Mississippi, where it originates. Once my case got to Greenwood, Mississippi, a detective by the name of Detective Layton started working on my case. Detective Layton told me that he was going to close the investigation on my case because he could not find any proof that there was any criminal activity associated with my trust or my mother's name. He told me the bank statement that I had with my mother's name on it and another person's Social Security number was just a typo. I asked Detective Layton what he meant by it being a typo. He said he spoke to attorney Floyd Melton III, and he had informed him that I was crazy, and it was a typo. So Detective Layton, who works for the Greenwood Police Department, went back to the criminals and told them what I had on them. To make a long story short, the criminals told him to close the investigation and to be done with it because I'm crazy. But I'm sure Detective Layton got paid off to stop the investigation because that's how these crooks keep getting away with their criminal activity over the past 20 years. Detective Layton also contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office in Greenwood, Mississippi. He spoke to U.S. Attorney Tim Jones, and Tim Jones told him as well that it was a typo and to stop investigation on my breach of fiduciary with my trust fund because I was just trying to get information about my mother's estate that I had no right to have any information on to begin with, legally, by law, because of a Mississippi Supreme Court ruling on a case that my sister and I had for an accounting of my mother's estate. Regardless of what I told the detective and what I was trying to find out about my trust, they all said that I was lying and that I was not trying to find out about my trust fund that was embezzled from. They said I was just trying to find out about my mother's estate. It didn't matter what I had to say about my breach of fiduciary with my trust fund, with the police, or the U.S. Attorney's Office in Greenwood, Mississippi, because they had already decided from talking with attorney Floyd Mountain III that I was a liar and was crazy and was just trying to be deviant and try to find out about my mother's estate. I asked Police Chief Jody Bradley at the Greenwood Police Department if he could please talk to his detective and have him reopen my investigation because there is criminal activity being conducted and it needs to be investigated. The police chief told me that identity theft that I had with my embezzlement case has a statute of limitation, and therefore the statute has run out and they're not going to investigate on those grounds. I have a breach of fiduciary with my trust fund, and there is no statute of limitation in the state of Mississippi for embezzlement. I got verification of the identity theft in July 2020 that it was indeed identity theft associated with my mother and the breach of fiduciary I had with my trust fund, with her using another person's social security number to open up a bank account to conduct criminal activity. So by law, the identity theft should start around July 2020 when I found out about it from the Secret Service agent. So since the police department in Greenwood, Mississippi refused to investigate, I went straight to the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi to ask for their help and have them investigate these crooks. The Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi also said I was just trying to find out about my mother's estate. I contacted the prosecuting attorney that had ruled on my complaint I sent to the Attorney General's office in Mississippi about my breach of fiduciary with my trust. I asked him why he thought there was no criminal activity being conducted when I have a bank statement with my mother's name on it and her using another person's social security number as her own. No one has been able to prove if it was a typo or not, and I did a search with the Department of Treasury, and they came back and identified World War II Series E bonds that were redeemed under my mother's name and this other person's social security number. Prosecuting attorney Eric Ray agreed with me and said, well, I guess you're right. I do see that there is identity theft being conducted with your mother's name, and we'll just have to open up your case again and have it investigated properly. This never happened. My case was never opened up and investigated properly because prosecuting attorney Eric Ray with the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi was relieved from his job before this could happen. And the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi wiped their hands clean of my case. I'm going to speak about my case with the Attorney General's office in detail on a later date in an episode on my podcast. Please don't miss out on listening to this podcast episode. You're going to love hearing about how the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi support organized crime and criminals that run the judicial system in Greenwood, Mississippi, because I have gone through hell trying to get them to investigate the white-collar criminals that use my mother's name with identity theft and embezzled from my trust with no avail. As time went by, I was referred by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oxford, Mississippi, to a Secret Service agent that would help me investigate my case, seeing the police and the Attorney General's office did not want to get involved. U.S. Attorney Samuel Stringfellow from Tennessee, who works at the Oxford, Mississippi U.S. Attorney's Office, was the one who referred me to the Secret Service agent, Roger Kirby. Roger Kirby has been working for the Secret Service for 30 years, and he helped me investigate my case. He contacted the Social Security Department and subpoenaed them for the name used with the Social Security number my mother was using to embezzle from my trust. The Social Security Department came back after the search and identified the person's name as Sandra K. Hayes. Shortly after I found out the person's name the Social Security number belonged to, I was told by Roger Kirby he was going to have to put my case on hold and stop the investigation because he was going to have to help out at the Republican and Democratic conventions. He said he would get back to me on August the 28th and he would continue my investigation on my case on this date. I asked him if he could please have New York Secret Service help me while he was on leave to work the Democratic and Republican conventions because my case stems into Syracuse, New York, and I have emails, addresses, phone numbers, and names of people that need to be investigated that are associated with my mother's name and the identity theft with it. He never helped me with the New York investigation, and he never came back and finished his investigation like he said he would on August the 28th. He lied to me. He is, in my opinion, protecting these criminals. I would go as far as to say that he's actually giving them information to help them stop from being indicted. I don't trust this agent, and his actions spoke loudly and gave me reason not to trust him. He even called my sister and told her about my breast and how we spoke about my breast over the phone. My sister called me and said she spoke with him about my breasts. I was appalled upon hearing this from my sister's mouth. I later contacted the Secret Service in Jackson, Mississippi, and complained to his superior about the sexual misconduct his agent conducted with an investigation with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust fund. His Secret Service superior told me that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oxford, Mississippi, said there's no criminal activity being conducted with my case, and that is the reason they stopped the Secret Service from investigating it. I was unaware that they had even stopped the investigation on my case until I spoke to Roger Kirby, superior with the Secret Service. I asked his Secret Service superior what he thought about Roger Kirby talking about my breasts to my sister. His superior said that this was uncalled for and unprofessional, and he was sorry. I agreed with him. What the hell do my breasts have to do with the investigation? I said. Not a goddamn thing. A few weeks later, on September 23rd, I received an email from Assistant U.S. Attorney Bob Norman from the Oxford, Mississippi U.S. Attorney's Office. Bob emailed me and told me that my case was closed and that they didn't see any criminal activity being conducted. Bob would not speak to me verbally over the phone, and neither would Samuel Stringfellow. They decided it was easier for them to email me and tell me that there's no criminal activity being conducted, regardless if I have a text message from Secret Service agent Roger Kirby, who they refer me to, saying he was going to subpoena the Department of Treasury for information on bonds that my mother redeemed under her name and another person's Social Security number. I contacted the Office of Professional Responsibility and filed a complaint of misconduct on the 2 U.S. attorneys that work at the Oxford, Mississippi U.S. Attorney's Office. I have not heard anything back from the Office of Professional Responsibility with the Department of Justice as of yet. In my opinion, I don't think that they will try to contact me. I have reached out to them and have left several voicemails. As well, I have left emails about the outcome of my complaint about misconduct with their Secret Service agent that they referred me to. So here I am today, still pushing forward, trying to get indictments on these crooks while exposing them and their corruption. Currently, I do not have the money to retain an attorney to take on my breach of fiduciary with my trust, nor do I have an attorney that will take it on contingency at this time. I'm hoping this will change in the near future. I'm sure you're all eager to find out what's going on with my case in the past and what's going on in the future. In future episodes, I will talk about my mother's estate that was left open 10 years after her untimely passing. And on other episodes, you will get to know each and every person that was involved in my breach of fiduciary with my trust. I'll have an episode dedicated solely to that person because I'm sure you're all curious to know who's involved and how they've been involved with my breach of fiduciary with my trust. I'll have an episode dedicated solely to that person because I'm sure you're all curious as to know who's involved and how they're involved with my breach of fiduciary with my trust and the identity theft associated with my mother's name. Please stay tuned for more true crime stories with episodes dropping daily. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and leave a comment. Until then, I will see you next episode. Goodbye, everyone.